So today, Rieka and I are in Charleston, South Carolina. We're on Rainbow Row, which has all the pastel painted Georgian style houses. Pretty cool. We just passed the old stockade, which is a fun fact from the Revolutionary War. There's a thing called a pillory, kind of like the stocks, but as a punishment for people, they used to actually nail their ears to the pillory and throw things at them like rotten food. Actually, during the Revolutionary War, two Irishmen were in a bar yelling about the British and supporting the British, and they did that to them right here. So when it came to the Revolutionary War, there's a lot of history that isn't taught. So everyone talks about the Boston Tea Party. What people don't know is 21 days before the Boston Tea Party, Charleston had a tea party. The South were the first ones to rise up and go against the British. Unfortunately, because of geography, the ability for the British to blockade Charleston as a city, which relied pretty much solely on trade, they weren't going to stand a chance. That's why we have the Boston Tea Party. Because of winters, the British couldn't blockade. The British had to get all the way up there. This is really close to the British hub of the Caribbean, and now no one ever hears about the Charleston Tea Party. So when you walk through Charleston, in the late 1800s, there was an earthquake here, and as you can see up these little circles with the bolts and the braces on them, that's how all the old homes were put back together after the massive earthquake, because it shattered this place completely, and the old masonry was not meant for earthquakes. So White Pine Garden, this is where they executed all the pirates. South Carolina has an interesting history with piracy, especially Charleston. Blackbeard blockaded the port so he could get some mercury medicine for his crew that was all suffering from syphilis. Stede Bonnet was here. This is where Stede Bonnet was executed, the gentleman pirate. And Anne Bonny was known to frequent here too, which Anne Bonny was an interesting female pirate, had some very unconventional relationships for the era in which she lived. Today they wouldn't be seen as anything different, but back in those days they'd get you in a lot of trouble. But because she was such a fierce pirate, people left her alone. She was actually known, and I love the historical documentation on this, because it says she allowed her blouse to hang loose so in the heat of battle she could use her assets to shock the male counterparts before striking them down. Interesting tactic. So South Carolina in the Civil War actually started the Civil War. Their first shots were fired here in Charleston, and a lot of people debate the start of the Civil War, reasons for the Civil War. There's actually a historical document that's in the Capitol in a museum that is the document that the state submitted to the Union, to DC, to say they were separating from the United States, from the colonies. And it actually states in that document that it was because they wanted to keep slaves. So there's not really any debate on that amongst historians, just bad historians who don't want to admit to how bad it was. But the thing that was not known about the Civil War was that there was a lot of Native Americans who fought on behalf of the South, mostly in the cavalry. And there's a couple reasons for that. Standing treaties where people in the South had allowed them to have their own communities. The Native Americans actually owned between 15,000 to 20,000 slaves, which is another thing that's quite often overlooked in history. they had their whole communities, and they actually suffered more after the Civil War than they did before. One of my favorite things I learned about Charleston and the Civil War is when the South were defeated and the Confederate soldiers left, the soldiers coming from the North didn't immediately move in. They waited until their African American regiments came down, and they had them enter this city. They were the first ones. So could you imagine, like, you're a slave not knowing what's going on, and all of a sudden you see the Union flag flying on a bunch of regiments of African Americans walking into your streets? It must have been a confusing and incredible sight. So, I mean, look at this place. Them walking down the street, all in formation, showing everybody that they lost. Must have been an emotional time for everybody, I'd imagine. But Confederates knew what was best for them, and they left before the fight even happened. Preserved the beauty of the city, what would have probably otherwise been probably reduced to ashes. But regardless of the bad history here, there's a lot of good history too, and there's a lot of just amazing architecture. I can't recommend the museum enough. Any of the museums, there's a bunch, but there's a couple of main ones, definitely worth a trip. I won't tell you which one to go to, but look at that.